Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's HFC workshop. I am Stephanie. I am the PRCA, so the Public Relations Chiropractic Assistant at HFC. I work behind the scenes on most of the marketing and communications you might see. And I am also Lisa Wood's daughter. Lisa Wood, you may know, and I will let her introduce herself.
Yeah, she's my kid, and I am Lisa Wood. Some of you know me already. I worked at HFC for quite a few years. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor and an art therapist. And Steph and I decided to do a little team action tonight on a very important topic.
Yes. So tonight we are talking about common barriers to happiness, and it's based on a Brene Brown book that we both love called The Gifts of Imperfection. If anyone hasn't read it, we highly recommend it. It's an easy read. I've already read it multiple times, and it's helped me realize that I don't need to be perfect, and perfection is boring, right?
True. I think that's true. Yeah.
So you don't have to have read the book in order to appreciate our chat tonight. I'm going to basically interview my mom, ask her professional feedback as a counselor on all these aspects. So we're going to get into it. For people who are focused on their physical health, which is, I imagine, a lot of the patients at HFC, they're coming in to get work done on their body, right? But why is it also equally as important for us to talk about their emotional well-being?
Well, at HFC, we've always had this think well, move well, eat well, do all the things well. There's some things that we need to remain focused on in order to go through life in a way that is aging well, which is what we're all doing all the time. So I would say because the body affects the mind and the mind affects the body, thinking well is crucial to how well our body can respond to just all things stress, which we have a lot of, and all things wonderful. I mean, we just need to be in our right mind.
And thankfully, in the book, Brene Brown gives examples of common barriers to happiness, but then she also gives some tools that help combat each one of them. So the barriers she talks about in the book are shame, perfectionism, and numbing. And then she gives us a nice word that everyone starts with a C to combat each one. So we're going to start with shame. So shame's a really big theme in her work in general, right? She's a shame researcher, which you don't hear of very often.
Her first and most successful TED Talk was all about shame. And I think it rocked the world because, number one, she was giving people permission to understand shame that they were feeling. But at the same time, she shocked a whole culture of people who had no idea that shame could be impacting them so greatly. So I think it's a really important topic. So shame is basically, people say there's two things. There's shame and then there's guilt. Okay, so the difference is very simple. If you do something you're not so proud of, let's say you're in a conversation at work or with a family member, and you say something just quickly and off the cuff, very cold, unkind maybe. Sometimes if you have a lot of self-understanding, you will know that was not right. My emotional intelligence tells me I could have done it better. That's guilt. You're just having some healthy guilt about saying something maybe you could have expressed differently. Shame, on the other hand, says you are so bad. You're a bad person for saying that. So shame takes our entire person, our being, and says, you're not even worthy. You're unworthy somehow. And that becomes then the mantra in our mind. If we fall under a lot of shame, we're always in a state of unworthiness, basically. So very big difference between shame and guilt.
So guilt is you feeling bad about something you did.
Exactly.
Whereas shame is you feeling bad about who you are.
Who you are. That's exactly right.
So Brene says that a really good tool to combat shame is open communication, because she says, shame thrives in like the dark corners of our mind and our moments by ourselves. And the minute we shed light on it, we open it up, we share with someone else, shame hates that. right? And so, but how exactly does that work? How does open communication really help break through the shame, spirals?
Yeah, good question. So, basically, like we said, because shame is a way that we talk to ourselves that says, you're bad, you're unworthy. If you always are just staying in that conversation that you're having with yourself, rather than saying, I'm having these thoughts, and talk to somebody about the thoughts that you're having. And is this normal? Am I being crazy? Like, if we open up and we start to connect with people about what we're thinking, they can very quickly say, hey, give yourself some grace here. You had a bad day at work, or you lost a relative. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be playing into that day to day. And someone on the outside that you connect with is going to help you get perspective. And that's why it's so important that we be brave enough to reach out to people we know and trust.
Do you have any other sort of simple practices or prompts or something that you feel can help people start communicating those sort of more difficult feelings we keep to ourselves?
In our world, there's so much information out there. So I would say there are some good podcasts. Mel Robbins has a great podcast. There's a lot of things that you can search for a podcast that is about encouragement, happiness, well-being, those sorts of things. Mel Robbins has a book called The Let Them Theory, which is a good one. Kind of helps us to reframe a lot of what's going on in real time. But of course, I hate to always say to people, because people who don't want to journal, they're just not going to journal. Journaling can be good. And I think people feel pressure, like, what am I going to say now in this journal? And then they feel bad about themselves because they can't journal effectively. Truth is, you can just write a few words. It can be very cryptic. I think having those conversations with those trusted others are important. I think getting outside in nature, going for walks and breathing the fresh air, I think very, very important. I think, just right off the bat, recognizing the difference between shame and guilt alone can sometimes be very eye-opening. You are not bad. None of us are. We were created in this universe for divine purpose, in my mind. And I think we're all awesome. But if you don't believe that, you got to look at the barriers. And again, that has to do with the story that you're telling yourself. If you had trauma growing up and you haven't done some counseling and some work on healing that trauma, certainly I implore you to do so. That's really important. If you have people in your environment, your 5 people who are kind of toxic, you have a sibling that's narcissistic, or a husband or wife that seems contemptuous and talks down to you, those are all things that you have to look at and say, I need to be in an environment that is healthy for me. How do I create that healthy environment? And it has to do with interpersonal. It has to do with your actions and what you do. It has to do with what you put into your body, the whole eat well that Dr. Nate talks about, sleep well, move well. Those are the essentials. So all of those have to be something that you're trying to do to support this new belief that you are not required to do it all right, and that shame that wants to rob you of any sense of self-esteem is something that you need to wrestle to the ground, like big time wrestling.
Well, this is a good segue, I think, to our next barrier, which is perfectionism, because we've talked about the connection you can try to have with these very real people in your life, the connection you can try to facilitate between you and nature, you and your body, or you and your counselor, all these different real channels for helping this process. And you mentioned all the wells, right? Like the think well, move well, be well. I am in a marketing world where a lot of people are on computers and phones. And so what about scroll well? Most of us not scrolling well. We are just doom scrolling our phones online. A lot of what we see are these curated versions of other people's lives. And even sometimes when we see those people in real life, it's just a quick interaction. It's, hey, how are you? We're getting the highlight reel, right? The elevator pitch of how they're doing. And that really very rarely tells the whole story. And perfectionism is a sneaky thing, right? Like it can look like ambition, it can look like motivation, achievement, all these things. And we think we're fighting towards that and we're trying to be perfect, but it's such a barrier to happiness. And most of the time when we're doing this scrolling online, it just becomes a comparison trap. We're just comparing ourselves to this ideal thing out there that doesn't really exist. So, how do you see that quest for perfectionism, showing up in your clients and people that you know, and what can we do about it?
Yeah. It can be tough because perfectionism can go all the way back to the parenting styles, the attachment issues that we can have in childhood. Are we securely attached, anxious attachment, all of that? If we don't feel healthy attachment as young people, as young children between 0 and 3 years old, our personality and sense of ourself will morph into a version of ourselves that is always trying to do something to feel attached. If I show my mother that I can be super well behaved, she'll love me more. So all of a sudden, perfectionism grows out of this: be well behaved, get good grades, do. But then the problem with that is the second you bring a C home, mom has a fit, right? So attachment issues can really come up. And those are things that you need to work with a counselor on, because if you're striving for attachment even later in life, something didn't get met. You need to look at those and recognize that there is nothing you have to do to earn a sense of value. But until you understand that deep inside, you are going to do things, okay, like strive for perfectionism in order to be accepted in the world that we live in. I mean, that's a lot. Let's say we're starting right now with perfectionism. This social comparison that you're talking about is a real thing. I think we owe it to ourselves, like you said, to find healthier ways of spending time on our devices, whether it's finding some of those apps that now are teaching you something, or you're learning a language, or truthfully, I mean, there are other ways that we can spend our time. And, if we have children, certainly they say between 0 and 2 years old, the mass brain matter that's developing in that time, you never want your child to be wanting a phone because at that point, because those are when their minds are super developing. There's all kinds of arguments around just healthy upbringing that can help offset that need to be perfect. But let's say you're in it, and you have a tendency to do those things. First and foremost, again, it's got to be about reframing the story that you're telling yourself. If you start focusing instead on the gratitude factor, the things that you already have, the things that are going great, the people in your life that are awesome, the job that you have that's certainly serving your needs and you don't hate too much, those can all offset sometimes that need to do. Where you just take a deep breath and say, things are good. I'm happy. And gratitude is always, it's always kind of on a continuum with something they call entitlement. So sometimes I think people who can be in a mindset of feeling entitled to life going well all the time also get way off into that doing and that sense that it's all about what they, what degree they have, what high-paying job they have. All these things sort of make them what they are. The opposite of that is gratitude, where none of that really matters. What matters is that we appreciate what we have. So I do think perfectionism can be slightly tied into entitlement on some level, and we need to get back to a place where we're just grateful for what we have. Right.
Well, it seems like perfectionism too is like, it's you always striving for this other, right? Like you're always trying to get more, do more, be more, whatever. And like you said, gratitude is sitting in yourself as you are, in the life you are in, with the people you're with, and appreciating those things.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Well, and Brene Brown does also give us another tool for perfectionism. And she says connection is a great tool, like real human connection. Can you go into why that is kind of such a powerful antidote to the effects of this like online comparison culture, perhaps, that we spend a lot of our time in?
Well, of course, because if you're in real online connection with people, you're having real connection from a standpoint of conversations and authenticity. There's vulnerability. It's a little messy. Everybody's a little messier. And, they're admitting today sucked. And I thought terrible thoughts about my boss and, oh my gosh, and so I think that safe place that we need to just let it all hang out and be kind of messy, and we know it's safe, and we give each other that grace that's so essential, lets us, like you said, just be in that place of, I'm so grateful right now. I have these people in my life that are allowing me to not be perfect. It's just crucial. So, elderly communities, everything they tell them, you got to get out of your apartment and connect. Why? Because we begin to implode on ourselves if we isolate. It's sort of that body in motion stays in motion. The longer you're isolated, the more isolated you want to be. It's important that we push through. Again, we'll talk about the C word in a minute, but we're going to push through, to a place where we're putting ourselves out there and we're letting ourselves be just what we are. I think grief is a good example of that. If you've ever lost somebody, as we have in our family just recently, you become pretty real. All of a sudden, a lot of things get stripped away and you just start to let yourself feel because you don't have any choice.
Right. Everything has to be raw.
Yeah. You have to, I can imagine the alternative. And so on some level, even social comparison, get back to that sort of full circle, is this way that we think we're less than, we're inadequate. It's a form of grief in itself because we're saying we're not like them. We don't have something, we're at a loss. Right. And, we have to reframe that story. If we see somebody and we admire them and we think they used to be out of shape like me and now they're so in shape and they're doing the work and they look great. And then we begin to feel that social comparison that says, see there, you're falling short again. You'll never make it. You're not perfect enough. But that's something we can take right now. Stop that thought, reframe that thought to, I can do that. I can do that just like they can. I'm not hindered from doing it. In fact, what would I need to do right now to begin that process? What's the thing I need to take out of my life right now that might be hindering my ability to make those healthy changes? Mm-hmm. And then what can I do? Simple little thing right now that can begin the process of getting in shape, just like they did. And we start to reframe it instead of, oh, they're doing great and I'm bad. We say, oh no, they've motivated me to now think of my life differently and to think of a new way of seeing myself. So it's a reframe. Do you see the difference, Steph?
Yeah. So I feel like, if we try to maybe look at an example outside of maybe just like an example of maybe somebody lost weight or something like that. But even if you're sort of scrolling online or whatever it is, or you go to a cocktail party or something and you're with a bunch of old friends and you come home and you feel sad, or you feel like it felt like it put something in my face that reminded me of what I don't have or something, it feels like that reframing concept you can use to say, okay, wait, why do I feel that way? Why do I feel like crap after I see that online or talk to those people? What is it that's causing me to feel less than? And then is there something I can do about it? Because the answer is going to be yes. There's going to be something you can do about it. Whether you can turn around and do exactly what that person did might be up for debate based on a variety of factors, but you could still do something to take yourself from this place you're feeling where you're ruminating to a better situation. Well, and sometimes this struggle, this shame, this perfectionism, if we can't quite get a grasp on it and we don't have these tools at our disposal, we turn to this, this last barrier that Brene Brown talks about, which is numbing, right? Where we just choose some kind of a behavior that helps take some of that pain, whether it's emotional or physical, away. How do you help people? Because, you are a professional in this world. How can you start to help people through identifying where they're seeking out and doing some numbing and what they might be able to do about that to make a healthier choice?
Well, believe it or not, one of the things that's very cognitive behavioral therapy like is to have people begin to jot down when they begin to have these negative thoughts throughout the day and what triggered that thought. So what was the thought? What triggered it? And then they call it the ABCD. And what you do is there's an activating event, then there's your belief about it, and then the consequence of that. And then I always say, how are you going to defend that? In other words, if something triggers you and it's really not even a logical thought, but you've got yourself all worked up about it, you need to defend by saying to yourself, is that really that important to you? Is that really something, So it can be that like concrete, where you literally start to catch yourself and then take action against that thought. Is it really true? What have you done that makes that true? And you're going to find nothing, nothing, and nothing in most cases. So I think that's a way to do it, is really beginning to see your thought life for what it is and catching yourself in those thoughts. Because we're going to have the same, typically 80,000 thoughts today we had yesterday. So if you want to change your thoughts, you're going to have to be consciously aware of what they are and begin to just be like, no, I'm not going there. That is not true. So that's one way. The other thing is, I think that we numb also by developing a way of interacting with people that can be just a way of sort of shutting down relationship. And Brene talks about it being taking certain forms like going against, which would be like pushing in and arguing with people, shying away. So you just avoid people, okay? We can do a lot of actions like that where all of a sudden we just sort of, with our world we have now, there's so much political division. It's really hard for a lot of people on both sides, and the middle to understand how to communicate, and so a lot of times you see moving against, oftentimes people go, I'm just not going there. Right? Mm-hmm. So moving away, these are all ways we numb and shut down any sense that we have anything to say or want to say anything. I mean, these are ways that we kind of can shut down and numb. So those are some things. And certainly the more obvious ones that we do, which would be anything we would do in excess. Mm-hmm. Too much chocolate, too much food, too many carbs, alcohol, even exercising too much. I mean, anything in excess is a way that we're numbing. And they're finding nowadays, even those of us who want to go out and like run, this is going to help us. It does to a point. But then your body starts to release cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So now you're just lumping more stress onto stress. So maybe walking would be better, or Tai Chi or Qigong, or a walk in nature, because some ways of numbing are just going to backfire on us for sure.
Yeah, well, certainly a lot of people have doom scrolling on their phone as a way of numbing because it's distracting, right? And so a lot of people do that. Even some people, kind of like you said, go and you work out really hard all the time. Some people use work as a form of numbing or a form of distraction, right? They just are like, I'm just going to focus on work and work, 80-hour weeks.
Yeah.
Kind of shut out all the other things going on and shut out any of the real feelings going on.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a real thing.
Brene, she has her tool she recommends with numbing, which is actually courage. She says the key to facing hard stuff is, instead of avoiding it, you have to actually face and acknowledge, like you're saying. I mean, and you made the perfect example of hold on, let me use those step-by-step process of identifying what the feeling is and what triggered it and actually kind of facing what it is. What are some other ways, maybe beyond that you kind of encourage people to just sort of practice, even if it's in a small dose, like some just everyday emotional courage?
Courage comes from it's French, cœur, for heart. So I always like the word courage because it's a heart issue, right? We're not going to solve a lot of issues of perfectionism coming at it super intellectually, although somehow we can, with the ABCD that we talked about. I mean, that's very concrete for sure. But I think courage, coming from the word heart, it means that it wants that openness. Our hearts can become hardened over time, which ends up in bitterness and anger and frustration, and you get this big line down the middle of your forehead after so many years. Don't look at mine. But we want to create a soft heart. We want to move into the world with a soft heart. That means we don't have all the answers. We want to we want to be compassion forward. We want to be love forward. These all sound sort of woo-woo, but I believe, truthfully, our world suffers from not enough compassion forward living. And so I would just say, open your heart. Don't be afraid to tell somebody, wow, that's a really beautiful dog, and your eyes are the most incredible shade of blue. And whatever it is, begin to just move from your heart into life a little bit more. And I think that's true courage, because you're not caring what people think. You're not in comparison, contrast to the world. You're just right there like a child would be, just letting it all hang out. That's true courage, I think.
Well, and I think going back to some of what we touched on earlier too, the more courageous you are and more heart forward you are in your actions and your words, the more likely you are to be met with authentic human connection, right? Because then people see you being your true self and your honest self, and they say, oh my gosh, hey, me too. And thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad I'm not alone. And so you can create out in the world the things that you might also need. You know, maybe you need some of that communication and connection. But by going out and also being honest about how you feel, you can put that into the world too, which is pretty amazing.
Well, and there are support groups. I mean, I always say if you can't find one, start one. We started a book club at work, and it started just books on wellness, and then it morphed into books on all kinds of things now. And I think the reason it's still even happening is people have a community to go to, and those people know them. It's like that show Cheers a long time ago. The song says, and they know you by name. I mean, it's a great treat to be known by name. And so I would say that any kind of support group or any kind of book club, something like that would be a courageous way to put yourself out there in a safe environment. Do your church community, Bible studies, whatever people want to do to share time with other people.
So as we kind of start to wrap up, for everybody who's listening today, are there any just sort of small daily practices? You've touched on a few, so maybe you can kind of reiterate just around something communication related, something about connection, about courage, just small things we could all do every day to kind of support our emotional and maybe even physical wellness.
Well, yeah, for sure. But I would start in the area of gratitude, and maybe you write a letter that you've long thought about writing to somebody who really impacted your life. That can be a way of just beginning to put yourself out there in a real way. Certainly all the things we've said about practicing just better wellness, what we eat, movement. We don't have to get our 10,000 steps, just get up every 15 minutes and walk around. But I mean, those are important things, I think, for sure. And that vulnerability that we talked about in our close circle of friends, and making sure our circle of friends are healthy. Things like that. I think those are ways of promoting joy and happiness in our life, is just the circle of people. And remembering the difference between shame and guilt. Allow yourself to feel a little guilty if you don't do something exactly to your liking, but wrestle shame to the ground. It's your enemy. It will rob you of any joy, and it's a liar. And so we want to really be clear that shame is only out to rob you of your belief in yourself. And so the second you hear that voice, that little voice that's talking to yourself saying, see, there you did it again, that needs to be wrestled to the ground. We need to take responsibility for our responses to life. Okay, we need to stop letting thoughts like that run wild in our minds. They say it's like training a puppy. For a while, that puppy's just peeing everywhere and doing whatever. That's like your thought life. You want to start to train that puppy. And that means sometimes you cage it, sometimes you deny it things. You have to do certain things in order to get a puppy to begin to behave better, just like children. So you want to train that puppy.
I think that's great advice. Well, I guess to sort of wrap us up, do you have a personal mantra or reminder that you use for yourself when you kind of feel stuck and, as I know you've called it before, stinking thinking?
Well, most of the mantras that I have came from my father, who you know very well. But some of them are really, really healthy. Like, there will be better days, all right? Or the whole idea that today is not the day that defines us. It's our response to today that refines us. So beginning to just build a sense of our mercies are new every morning. We can start tomorrow if we didn't do as well today. We can start tomorrow. And so we always have a new beginning, a new chance to get it right. And it is that building, that stacking, they call it in habits. It's that stacking that begins to help us get it right. So having that sense that I say to myself a lot, I can do this. There'll be better days. This wasn't my shining moment. Things that give you a lot of sense of grace, which grace will drive shame away. Grace will tell shame it has no place. And the more we can give ourselves grace, the less we will feel shame, and we will not feel that drive to be perfect. We will just start to, like you said, just get into the moment and roll with whatever happens. We lose the fight then. And I don't mean lose the fight like we lose the desire to fight life. We just rest in it a little bit more. And I think that's important. That's the most important.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mom, for chatting with me today.
You bet, babe.
This was so fun. And thank you to Dr. Nate for letting us jump in and host today's workshop.
Yeah, we loved it, Dr. Nate. Thank you.
All right. Everybody have a great night. Thank you so much.
Night, everybody. Bye-bye.